After Iraq's Kurds voted in an independence referendum Monday, the government in Baghdad has said it will not recognize what it says is an unconstitutional referendum. But would a strong yes vote pressure it to make concessions? And as U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis visits India, will he leave with defense deals? And how is Pakistan likely to react? Welcome to The Point. I'm Teng Lei, sitting in for Liu Xin. We are now waiting for the results from the Kurdish independence referendum. Early indications are that around 93% voted yes to independence. The Iraqi government has said it will not hold talks with the Kurdistan Regional Government, or KRG, about an unconstitutional referendum, but the Iraqi Kurds hope the voting could mark the start of a peaceful break with Baghdad, although there are fears it could place them on a new collision course with the government and its neighbours. To discuss this further, I'm joined from London by Sabah Al-Mukhtar, President of the Arab Lawyers Association in the UK. In Tel Aviv, we have Mir Javandanfar, who's a Middle East analyst, and in our Beijing studio, we have Li Guofu, a Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let me open with this question. We seem to be getting indications of a yes vote, but what is the upshot of this yes vote, which is non-binding? I mean, could it not worsen the already tense situation? Why don't you take it first, Mayor?
Well, I think first and foremost, as the Kurdish authorities have said, the aim of this referendum was to give them mandate when it comes to negotiations with Baghdad. But I think there's another reason for the recent referendum, is that it put the world's spotlight on the question of Kurdistan in northern Iraq. And basically, it was a huge PR publicity, which I have to say was a very successful one by the Kurdish authorities, to put Kurdistan on top of the headlines and to give exposure to the question of Kurdistan. Just think of the thousands upon thousands of interviews and reports addressing the question of the people, the Kurdish people, their quest for independence. So I think the Kurdish authorities also want to use that in their favor to obtain support in the international community by attracting as much public support in other countries in their quest for freedom. Will it be sufficient? That all depends if they can convert all this into diplomatic leverage at the negotiation table with the Iraqi government and in negotiations with neighboring states. For now, it seems the Iraqi government and the neighboring states are not interested in negotiations with them, so we have to see what happens next. One note of caution and concern is the question of Kirkuk. It's a very, very sensitive area. There is a possibility that could be armed clashes there because the Kurds have included that in part of their referendum, but the Arab and Turkmen Iraqis are vehemently against Kirkuk being included in a future Kurdish state.
Sabah, do you agree with Mir's assessment that this has been a very successful attention-seeking move?
Well, it is seeking, yes, but making an effect, I don't think so, because the Kurdish issue, the Shiites and the Sunni, has been in the mainstay of the American policy in occupation of Iraq in 2003. 2003, the Americans have decided that Iraq, there is no Iraq, there are no Arabs, there are Kurds, Shiites and Sunnis. As far as the Kurdish region, we all know, everybody knows that the Kurdish nation as people, they've always wanted to have their states. They started with the Mahabad Republic in Iran in the early part of last century, where they've had clashes with the governments in Iraq and in Syria and in Turkey and the Iranians over the last 20, 30, 40 years. So there is nothing new in that one. I think certainly as far as the domestic politics, Barzani had a problem because he had no legitimacy over the last 2 years. He wanted to show some legitimacy. He wanted to show himself to be the national leader of the Kurdish people. As far as independence is concerned, Kurdistan has been out of control of the government of Iraq since 1991, even before 2003. I don't think there is anything new in the thing. It is making more animosity among the neighbors, among the people. The idea that somehow you can create a state, a landlocked state, which is going to take land from the 4 neighboring countries, from Turkey, from Iran, from Syria and Iraq, is not a very tenable exercise. I think that we are heading for conflicts. How long the conflict will last, what format it will take, there will be probably initially the reaction of people, like, for instance, insurrection within the Kurdish region because of the agents of Iran, agents of Turkey, agents of the Iraqi government indeed. You have the Hashd al-Shabi of Iraq on the border. You have the Turkish army on the border with Kurdistan, and the same thing with the Iranian. So I think we are heading for trouble. That is on the military side. On the economic and other aspects, I think the people in Kurdistan are heading for difficult days when the borders are closed. The support of Israel to it is more of a moral, ethical. I don't think the Israelis are going to send their airplanes. I don't think they can do very much under the current circumstances. The Kurdish people who have voted very happily for independence, they know that there is a price to be paid for that one, because what is being done is illegitimate under the constitution of Iraq. No country, all constitutions in the world, all nations are made up of various groups, and all constitutions do not allow people to decide to secede from the country without their approval. We had an experience in Sudan.
There's a lot of skepticism there on
agreed.
this referendum. Mr. Lee, you were telling me before the show that you think Kirkuk is also going to be ripe for armed conflict. How concerned are you?
Well,
yes, Mr. Lee.
I think, as our two guests have already said that, for the Turkish people in the region, the referendum was a success one, and I'm a little bit surprised, the high turnout, and some people say that almost 80% of the people, eligible people, they turn out to cast yes for the, the referendum.
We're also hearing reports that there are irregularities, though. There are people voting multiple times and people not registered to vote.
Yeah, I think, but
still very
people
high, yes.
are very, very high, the turnout. But what I'm afraid that is, this kind of referendum would, maybe trigger, spark a new hot pot of a crisis. We have already seen that the neighboring countries have massed, their troops, they conducted sort of military exercise, and all the international communities and has, expressed, very much concerned, not to say, opposed this referendum. And Turkey has a warning that, it may take very, very harsh, measures, militarily, politically, diplomatically, and even, the security, the issues. So I think, whatever, the results of this referendum, I personally, I don't believe it will or viable to proceed the aspiration of the Kurds. What I'm afraid is, as our guest has already said, that there may be some new crises, some new crashes, and sort of a new source of instabilities, despite the fact that the Middle East, generally speaking, has already in a deep, a kind of a state of instabilities. And this referendum maybe added a new source of instability or conflicts.
Yes, our three guests certainly agree there. Mayor, why hasn't the international community, which is so broadly against the referendum, have combined threats and promises to postpone it?
Well, I don't think they had enough leverage to do that. The tide was so overwhelmingly much in favor of the referendum inside Kurdistan in Iraq that it would have been very, very difficult and, domestically speaking, very costly for President Barzani to have cancelled it. I think, one of the major goals of the referendum, even before they get a state or anything near it, was that it brought together the various Kurdish factions, the two biggest Kurdish factions in Kurdistan, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and the KDP, the Kurdish Democratic Party. These parties are deeply divided on many issues, But with this referendum, it brought them together, and it would have been very costly for both of them to step away from this. So I think, you know, the tide was so much in favor, and the political cost so big that it made it very difficult for Mr. Barzani to say no. And I also think that I understand the Arab countries are very sensitive about any country. Is about its sovereignty being challenged or parts of it break away, but we have to also look at it the other side. The Kurds have been treated like outsiders in Iraq, and now they saw it as their chance. We see that in the post-ISIS period in the Middle East, there are new vacuums being created. And what happens when there are vacuums? According to the basic laws of physics, they have to be filled, and the Kurds have decided to take this opportunity to fill it. The way they see it is that this opportunity may not arise, so this is why it was very difficult to reverse this decision for the Kurdish authorities.
So, Sabah, let's broaden this out a bit. Will the referendum inspire Syrian Kurds and Turkish Kurds to do the same?
Well, precisely. That's why the position in the neighboring countries is going to be the same thing. Kurds, there are Kurds in Syria, there are Kurds in Turkey, there are Kurds in Iran. And once these countries accept the idea that a group of people can secede from the country, and this is not right that to say that the Kurds were treated as outsiders or anything. In Iraq history, most of the prime ministers and ministers and leaders of the military, they were all Kurds because they were behaving as Iraqis. The current Kurds are behaving as Kurds, and that is where the problem lies. But I don't think at the end of the day the other countries are going to permit this one, because it undermines these states. All states, every nation in the world, its constitution would not allow people within it to secede. This is not a right of self-determination as it is being propagated by the Kurdish leadership. Article 2 of the Charter of the UN says about the self-determination is for the countries that are under occupation, and the Kurds are not occupied by anybody. They are rulers of their own area, and currently even the president of Iraq is a Kurd, and there are lots of leadership. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is full of Kurds, so the idea that somehow they are discriminated against is nonsense. And even if that is correct, that is not how you treat issues of minorities in countries. They are protected under international law. All minorities are protected, whether they are the Palestinians in Israel or whether they are the Kurds in Iraq or Turkey or wherever. So the idea that somehow the Kurds in Iraq can have their state, but the Kurds in Turkey won't, or those in Syria won't, that is not realistic. And I think actually Mr. Masoud Barzani is talking about the state of Kurdistan, and he is talking about the Kurds in all the areas. So he's actually, the plan is that all the Kurds in all these countries become one nation. But I think the idea that somehow Mr. Barzani has got everybody on board, yes, they have, all the Kurds in Kurdistan have voted for the separation, but that doesn't follow that they will support Barzani, who is seeking legitimacy for the last 2 years. He has been illegitimate because his term year
I do want to give
finished.
some time to Mr. Lee, because I'm interested in why there's this trend of separatist movements around the world. For example, the Catalonia referendum. How do you see that?
I think this is, generally speaking, the people, they have the right to have self-determination. But at the same time, I'm also calling for if the certain areas of the people, they will conduct this kind of referendum to determine whether they still remain in the country, or to set up a new countries. Is I think generally speaking, the whole people. I think the people are concerned. In some cases, the whole nation would decide, not the area of the people. We can see that after the end of the war, especially I think this subject of the Soviet Union, there are many the new countries has been emerged by self-determinations. But as our guests have already said that the Kurdish people.
This is such a complex topic. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We do have to revisit this, of course, once the results come out. A big thank you to our guest tonight, Sabah Al-Muqtam, President of the Arab Lawyers Association, joining us from London. There, Javan Dafa, a Middle East analyst, speaking to us from Tel Aviv. And in the Beijing studio, Li Guofu, a Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. So while we await the results of the referendum, the big question is, will the KRG moderate its stance with the win, or will the world see an already ruptured region face more division? U.S. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis paid a visit to India Tuesday, his first official one as a member of the Trump administration. The visit is part of the Pentagon's shift towards working closer with India in defense manufacturing and having India play a bigger role in Afghanistan security. But does the partnership really have any chance of working when India wants technology transfers that the U.S. companies don't want to give? And how is American support for India playing a key role in Afghanistan seen by Pakistan? Let's get some perspectives with our guest. Joining us from New Delhi is Professor Madhav Nalapat at Manipal University, and in the Beijing studio we have Zhang Junshe, Vice President of the China Naval Research Institute. Welcome, gentlemen. So let's talk about the country's leaders having already met in June just this year. What message does the Defense Secretary Mattis' visit to India send out? To our guest in India first, please.
Well, I'd like to point out that India-US relationship in defense has actually flowered since 2005. In 2005, with the nuclear deal between George Bush and Manmohan Singh, it was clear that the United States no longer saw India as just the biggest country in South Asia, but as an Asian and a global power. So from that time, defense ties have expanded very substantially. Today, both India and the US do more military exercises with each other than with any other country. US has now become a major supplier of India's defense equipment. So the military ties have expanded a lot, also in the face of common threats to their security. So from that point of view, Secretary Mattis is carrying forward a legacy of the earlier Bush and Obama administrations.
Right, and Mr. Zhang, do you think this move is mainly to contain China and Pakistan in the region?
Well, I think Mr. Mattis' visit to India indicates that the United States wants to strengthen its security and defense relationship with India. Why the United States wants to do so now? So outsiders say that the United States wants India to be a chess piece to contain China and Pakistan, but we'll wait and see.
Professor Nalapat, US companies don't want to transfer their technologies when it comes to fighter jets and drones, whereas Modi's government is hoping to make this part of the Made in India drive. So is it possible that Mattis may return to the US without those big bucks orders?
Well, I think the orders are going to come because all that the US government is saying is that the Indian government or Indian private industry will have to deal directly with private US companies. These companies are not controlled by the US government, so you'll have to deal directly with them. Of course, the US is a complicated country. You have several laws on technology transfer. The US legislature has got to come into the picture. But overall, India is now regarded as a major defense partner of the United States. India is seen as a very important new ally of the United States, and there's considerable goodwill in the US legislature for India. So I don't think any of this is going to be a serious difficulty once the two sides decide that they're going to come and work closely together.
Mr. Zhang, even if, say, Lockheed Martin decides to make the F-16 jets in India, a lot of skeptics are saying that's really not going to lift Indian defense manufacturing, and that the standard of manufacturing really isn't that sophisticated. Would you agree?
I I agree. Because I don't think the United States will sell the very sensitive defense equipment to India, because the United States knows that India also has a close relationship with Russia, and most of its defense equipment comes from Russia, including its aircraft carrier, nuclear-powered submarines, and also fighters. So the United States is afraid that if technology will be leaked to Russia or will be lost to Russia. So I don't think the United States will sell the very sensitive defense equipment to India. And also we know that India asked for the transfer of technology from the United States, and I'm not sure the United States will transfer the technology of the highly advanced equipment which will sell to India.
Professor Nalapat, the Pentagon has said, well, obviously the US is trying to send out the message that it welcomes a bigger Indian role in Afghanistan, and this seems to have done an about-face from previously when it was actually engaging Pakistan. So, you know, how has this shift changed, and what's it going to do to Pakistan-India-US relations?
Well, I'd like to point out that in 2001, Prime Minister Vajpayee offered full Indian military support to George Bush in the battle against the Taliban. George Bush did not take up that offer. He chose General Musharraf in Pakistan. And today we are in 2017, and the Taliban are still an extremely powerful force. So very clearly the strategy of the United States of depending on Pakistan has not worked. And that is why I think Washington is now looking to India as a partner in Afghanistan. India certainly has been hostile to the Taliban. India does not like this kind of terrorism or these kind of violent activities in Afghanistan or any other part of the world. And therefore, I think the United States understands the lessons from 2001. Its failure in Afghanistan, it's in fact its military defeat at the hands of the Taliban, and therefore it believes that an alliance with India, which frankly it should have done in 2001, is the best option.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Zhang?
We can see that the former commander of the U.S. Central Command has expressed publicly its appreciation for the support of Pakistan to the United States in overthrowing the Taliban regime in 2001. And also, we know that Pakistan has played a great role in the war against terror, and also Pakistan is a victim of terrorism. But we have seen that India has been accusing Pakistan of providing support to terrorism. But also we can see that Pakistan also accuses India of providing support to terrorist groups. So we should speak on evidence, on facts, don't make judgments on its own feelings. And the United States, I think, should take a balance, strike a balance between Pakistan and India in the role of fighting against terrorism.
Okay, Professor Nalapat, since the Trump administration wants to see more Indian involvement in Afghanistan, where are we going to see that involvement? Is it going to be the soft side, like health and education, infrastructure, or is it going to be in the military or political arena?
Well, I'd like to point out that India has been involved in Afghanistan for a very long time. We have nearly 800,000 Afghan refugees in India. And may I point out, these are frankly moderate Pashtuns. Now, they are not fanatic Pashtuns that were recruited by Taliban, but very moderate Pashtuns. Nearly 1 million Afghan refugees are staying in India, and we have been very much involved in Afghanistan. If you got electric power in Kabul, hospitals, schools, roads, a lot of that has been built by India, and India has a considerable presence there. India obviously would like to ensure that this kind of activity which benefits the Afghan people will continue, and so far as the military is concerned, there are some suggestions for training of the Afghan military, and possibly those suggestions will be acted upon. What the future will bring, I do not know, but as of now, Indian help is overwhelmingly civilian in nature.
Okay, so the US wants India to boost assistance to Afghanistan, criticizing Pakistan for harboring terrorists. You know, are these tensions between India and Pakistan going to escalate to a new level? Mr. Zhang?
Well, I'm afraid this will come true because we know that previously Pakistan has provided a lot of support to the United States in fighting terrorism during the last several years. And also India and Pakistan are really actually enemies. So if the United States provides a lot of advanced equipment, especially military equipment to India, and India, with the support from the United States, the outsiders are afraid that it will take provocative actions against Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan will fight back, will take retaliatory actions against India. And to be honest, I think both India and Pakistan have been fighting terrorism, and they should work together in fighting terrorism. Don't fight against each other.
Yes, working together always sounds good on paper. Professor Nalapat, could Islamabad actually increase its support for Afghan militant groups if India becomes more involved in Afghanistan?
Well, if it does that, then India is going to become even more involved in Afghanistan. India will become more involved if there is more trouble in Afghanistan. So I think Pakistan will be well advised not to support these groups, but to help India, to help the United States, and frankly China. China also is a victim of terrorism. All these countries should work together to ensure that terrorists and militants don't have a role in Afghanistan. So I think that is an extremely important thing. Secondly, we are not enemies of Pakistan. We are unhappy with the Pakistan military, which is unfortunately taking part in some activities in India, but the Pakistan people are our friends. And we have extensive linkages with civil society in Pakistan. I myself write regularly for a Pakistan paper, and I'm proud of that.
Thank you so much, and that's a great note to end our discussion on. Thank you to our guest in New Delhi, Professor Madhav Nalapat from Manipal University, and in the Beijing studio, Mr. Zhang Junshe, Vice President of the China Naval Research Institute. That's all we have time for this edition of The Point. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit on our Facebook page using the handle @ThePointWithLX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. I'm Zhang Lei sitting in for Liu Xin. Thank you for watching.